Hi everyone, I'm Joanna.
And I'm Jenny.
And welcome to Hyphenated, the podcast about living in the hyphen. So this week we wanted to talk about sort of identity, but with the guise of politics. Because politics, my friends, is so like in bed with identity. It's gross. It's gross. I mean, it's gross. It's not gross. We shouldn't say that about, any person's sexual desires, but politics and identity are in bed together, straight up. They're in bed together. So the first thing that Jenny and I sort of always talk about is the term Latino, the term Latin, the term Hispanic, the term Latinx, this sort of one word identifier to describe all of the Latinos that live in the US and which one is right and which one is wrong.
Yeah.
Which is inherently like just the most complex conversation you could have, because this one word, it incorporates all the different ethnicities, it incorporates all the different races, religions, countries. I mean, when I moved to the States, I didn't consider myself Latina. I consider myself a Venezuelan. You consider yourself a Cuban American. Then it was, I don't know what your relationship to the word Latino or Latin or Hispanic is, but there's this predominant push to have one word to put us all in one bucket.
And to make everyone happy, which has been quite impossible.
It's almost impossible. But, one of the parts of U.S. culture that sort of needed this word to exist in order to simplify is politics. Politicians needed to put a name on this ever-growing population that they needed in order to win the presidency. And that term is, for a lot of campaigns, it's Latinos. You have Latinos for Trump, Latinos for Biden. And, one of the things in the past election that sort of really opened my eyes is Florida. So Florida is, my American friends, when it was found out that most Latinos in Florida voted for Trump, my American friends were like, yo, I don't get it. Like, that's crazy. Like, Trump hates Latinos. And like, what? And, I think Florida is an example of not only the diversity that exists within the Latino community and how different we all are and how different our traumas are, but also how completely misguided so many people are when trying to cater to the Latino vote. And how, and most of it comes down to them overgeneralizing us again and ignoring the idiosyncrasies within us in order to be able to speak correctly to a group of people. Because Florida is the world of Cuban Americans and now recently Venezuelan Americans. Cubans and Venezuelans have completely and utterly different traumas, different histories, different political issues that they've gone through. It's like black and white to talk to a, Puerto Rican in New York who's been here since, their whole life, to someone in Florida who recently became a citizen and escaped Venezuela. Those are two completely different just realities to cater to. And I would love to hear your thoughts, because you are from Florida. You are Cuban American. You are that subset of the Latino identity that, in my opinion, Democrats still do not understand, for example. And Republicans have been very intelligent in how they've catered to Cuban Americans and to Venezuelan Americans and even to Nicaraguan Americans.
It is highly complex, and it is rather shocking that it's taken this long for people in politics to wake up to this fact that we are not a monolith. I think maybe I'm being hopeful here, too hopeful, but I watched a lot of news surrounding the election. I mean, I've been watching the news nonstop for years and years. But more than ever, I saw a lot of commentators mention, why do you think Latinos are so divided? Like, they were genuinely disturbed and confused. But then we have people like Ana Navarro showing up and saying, y'all, wake up. We are not the same. We are all so different. And you need to start, seeing that, or, Democrats specifically are never going to know how to truly speak to these different communities, because yes, we all have a lot of shared experiences as Latinos across the board, but we are so different in many ways. And that's what determines the vote in the end. I was talking to a lot of people that were working for the Biden campaign during the election, and there was one moment that shocked me to my core, which was, we were just discussing, they were asking, like, we really want to mobilize the vote. We want people to come out and vote. We want to inspire Latinos to go out and vote. So, we thought of taking a Latina politician to go and inspire the vote. And they were like, yeah, so we're thinking about inviting Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to come to Miami. And I was like, wait. Are you insane? Are you insane? And that for me was like, these people clearly have no idea who they're talking to. Like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for, like, I'd say literally all Venezuelan Americans I know, like, makes them fearful. They're scared of her because they think that she is an ultra left winger, which, it's something that people need to understand is what Cuban Americans, Venezuelan Americans, and Nicaraguan Americans, what is their trauma? Venezuelan Americans have been fed this narrative that, the left and the right of the U.S. is similar to the left and the right of Venezuela. So Republicans since the 1980s, literally since Reagan, have been intelligently in Florida saying, hey, we are the party that is, conservative and anti-communist. Since the 80s, they've been saying that. And by the way, I mean, the fact that we have to even clarify that Joe Biden is not a communist is like laughable. But to a lot of Venezuelan Americans, I see it online. Yeah. They perceive Biden as a communist. Why? Because the Democratic Party has the same speech that they give to los Latinos in el East Coast. No. And then they go to Florida and think that will work. You're talking to a group of people, a lot of them, Cuban Americans, had to escape Fidel Castro, a communist dictator. Venezuelans have escaped a left-wing dictatorship. They have fears and traumas of the left, which the Democratic Party is not speaking to. It's not clarifying. Meanwhile, the Republicans have been brilliant since the 1980s, claiming that they're anti-communist, which is useless in America to be the anti-communist party, because the other one is not the Communist Party. The Democratic Party is not the Communist Party. But they're so intelligent in how they worded it and how they position themselves and how they frame themselves. And I think, it is imperative for the Democratic Party to realize that what Venezuelans and Cubans and Nicaraguans have gone through completely changes their perspective and their point of view and how they vote. Yeah, I mean, it only got worse with Trump. I mean, I know they've been doing this since the 80s, but Trump, I think, really put the fear in a lot of people, because a lot of the words that came out of his mouth were more triggering and harsh and aggressive. And Trump said, if you vote for the Democrats, you're going to lose everything. They're going to be worse than Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela's used as a pawn for the Republican. You're preying on their fears. It feels fucked up, but it's fucked up and incredibly intelligent because they did it correctly. It's evil genius, I guess you could say. They know their audience. They know how to get Florida because they're speaking directly to the people. They're speaking directly to their experience. Like,
that is something that it's very frustrating to me to see from the lack of it in the Democratic Party to speak to the Venezuelan experience. Like, it is not reflected at all. And, there's so much misinformation out there. And what you said is just so on the money, which is fear. It's instilling fear by using the traumas, the specificity of these traumas, by the way, of the subgroup within the Latino community, and using it brilliantly. Unfortunately, it's shocking to me to see how we have so much farther to go to express how different we are. And and like it's people have this perception of Latinos being like really liberal, pro-immigration, and it's like some of them are not. Like, I mean, I don't know, you could speak to this more. I have some Cuban American family in Miami. They are like ultra anti-immigrants. They're like, they don't want to help they're like, they got here illegally. The Mexicans, we came here legally. We did everything legal. And it's like, well, yes, because your immigration is completely different.
It is something I struggle with so much because it is highly hypocritical and there's a severe lack of understanding and empathy. I think across the board with a lot of Latino voters, it seems like once they assimilate, they become more conservative about immigration policy, which is, again, so hypocritical, and it makes me incredibly sad. And look, I think when I use the word privilege in terms of my skin color, or even, speaking on privilege when it comes to Cuban American immigration policy up until Obama ended wet foot, dry foot policy, a lot of Cuban Americans tend to get triggered by that word, privilege, because they think that we're trying to erase their trauma and their struggles and their loss and their pain and suffering as being refugees and escaping, a country where they felt they were, being treated cruelly, and then that's all valid. And does not mean we're trying to erase all of that. But ultimately, Cuban Americans, compared to the rest of Latino America, we have had it a lot easier over the decades when it's come to immigration policy. Again, wet foot, dry foot being one of them, which was instilled.
Can you explain quickly? Is that like the moment a Cuban arrives to the States, they are on the path to citizenship?
Yes. So I believe it was instated in 1995, and it basically grants Cubans who touch American soil the privilege of it's basically a fast track to citizenship, which is not afforded to many immigrants.
No, it's not afforded. I mean, it's a very specific.
It's a very special treatment.
What very specific context for a voter. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, what very specific context for a group of people that like will be voting. So when it's like, oh, Latinos care about immigration and they they're pro DACA, they're pro this. It's like, okay, yes, maybe the majority, but do you realize that there's people that have a completely different context for how they did this, for how they arrived and how they were able to become citizens? Like,
yeah, it's again, I think there's like an empathy issue here, because I don't think you necessarily have to go through something in order to feel another's pain. So that's a whole other issue. But again, like, Cubans have never had to worry about deportation or having undocumented status until now, right? Because now, the wet foot, dry foot policy ended at the end of Obama's term. So, but I think that's still so new that I haven't seen that discussed as much. I still think that, Cuban Americans that have assimilated over the decades as a whole, they still feel very privileged and they really stick their noses up at other Latinos who are trying to come to the United States to have a better life and flee oppression, flee violence, flee, being in danger, like, a better life for their children. I mean, that's the American dream, no? That's why my Cuban American family loves the United States so much. To them, it's like their savior, the freedom,
They were treated and
Yeah.
welcomed in
And
in
so
a,
it's
in a way.
weird that they don't see that and go, oh my gosh, I totally understand why people from Guatemala, people from El Salvador, Mexico are trying to come over. And it's just, they continually throw the whole, that's illegal. We did it the legal way. And it's like, well, maybe if you took some time and actually spoke to some people on the other side and did some research, you would see that they have it a lot harder when it comes to coming over here.
It's interesting you say that. I know we've talked about this in the past, but that there's a lot of similarities that we see between Cuban Americans and Venezuelan Americans. And, how so many Venezuelan Americans are Republican and very right wing, and how a lot of it has to do with the trauma of their past and of the current situation in Venezuela. And it's something that, like, it's during the 2016, but also during the 2020 election. I remember how Trump would go to El Doral, specifically a Venezuelan neighborhood in cerca Miami, and do roundtables to discuss the Venezuelan situation, specifically the Venezuelan situation.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, listen, it's frustrating to me that, people see a left and right de Venezuela the same way here, like that they're unable to see the context of the Democratic Party. But I can empathize with them feeling heard, and understood, and spoken to. So, there's an issue of communication and there's an issue of understanding. And like, meanwhile, Kamala, God bless her, she just like stopped by a Venezuelan arepera and ate an arepa and left. And by the way, the owner of that arepera came out and said, like, she is not a communist, therefore she would never have allowed Kamala Harris to come eat at her restaurant if she had known what it was or whatever. So, there's just this disconnect. There's this disconnect of, in my opinion, a party that should be representing the immigrant experience, which is the Democratic Party, which is the party that, has tried to move protected status of Venezuelans in Congress, and has more open and understanding laws of immigration and this, that, and the other. And truthfully, in my humble opinion, is better at representing the multicultural aspect of America.
I agree.
But Republicans have done an incredible job of understanding the fears of the left that these immigrants have, but simultaneously reiterating the conservative values that a lot of Latino family have. I mean, you've said it. It's like 98% Catholic. Like, of course they're conservative. The abortion issue is huge for Latinos.
Abortion is huge. It's probably the reason why many Latinos across the board, even, not even specific to Cuban or Venezuelan,
across the board,
is single issue voting, which is just abortion. That in and of itself is enough for a very conservative Catholic or Christian Latino to vote for a Republican candidate.
Like, I remember, so the woman that she helps when my sister comes with all my nephews, which is like a ridiculous amount of very young boys. We have, it's honestly awful. So when my sister comes to visit my parents, we always hire this wonderful Nicaraguan nanny to help us with the children, because honestly, there's just too many. And she's like, I don't know, she's like Mary Poppins. I don't know how she does it. Like, the children only listen to her. Anyways, that's another story. She's a Nicaraguan undocumented immigrant. And I've talked to her a lot, and she explains to me how hard it is for her because she's undocumented. She's been here for 20 years. And she would love to figure out a way to become an American citizen. And like she has a lot of issues with the Republican Party and how they, and she doesn't vote obviously, but then she's like, but I would never be able to vote Democrat because of abortion. And I'm like, honey, you're an undocumented immigrant. What are you talking about? Like if there's a person that would want to vote for the Democratic Party, it's you. And she's like, I know, but like, I'm super Catholic. And that for me was a moment of like, even I don't understand the Latino vote.
It's very...
Even I don't understand it. I don't pretend to understand it. But like, what a shock to me. Like, that was shocking to me.
But, I think when it comes to religion and politics, I mean, a lot of that is also rooted in our churches and the leadership in the churches, because I feel like they're failing us. For me personally, right? The reason why I am with the Democratic Party, even though my family is all Republican, is because I do feel like the Democratic Party is for the people and for human rights. And I think, as someone who went to a Christian and Catholic school my whole life and really studied the Bible and even took Bible courses in college, and that's not to say that I know everything, because that's not at all the case, but I have this understanding of who Jesus was. Whether you believe in him as a real person or as just an example or a prophet to live by, to me, a lot of the values of the Democratic Party fall in line with what Jesus wanted and the kind of person Jesus was and how forgiving and loving he was, and how he took everyone under his wing.
Religion, immigration context, like all of this incorporates itself in how creating a monolith of such a complex group of people just does not work.
No, absolutely not.
I think that this monolith and in ignoring its idiosyncrasies and the complexity and diversity is dangerous in politics.
Yes.
It's very dangerous in politics. And I really hope that, I think it's happening more and more, that people understand that there's so much at play within the Latino community and so many different priorities, and the misinformation out there is targeted. And when you don't speak directly to your constituents and to these group of people, when you don't speak directly to them, they will seek that message with misinformation, which is what's happening. I don't know if, I'm assuming it's happening with Cuban Americans because it's happening like crazy with Venezuelan Americans, which is like, they don't feel talked to, right? They don't feel talked to by the Democratic Party. They don't feel talked to. They think that the policies with Venezuela are weak. They feel like the policies with Cuba are weak. So therefore, when people tell them the Democratic Party is socialist, communist, and they hate capitalism and whatever, they will believe it because they feel spoken to. Someone spoke to them and told them that. I've struggled a lot because many people are so confused about how I could support the Democratic Party as a Venezuelan. And for me, it's equally confusing how Venezuelans could vote for someone who uses the same things that Chavez and Maduro did.
Yep.
With, division, misinformation,
totalitarianism,
being against journalists, silencing people. Yes, one is left, one is right, but they're the same thing. It's the same sort of rhetoric. It's hateful. It's divisive. How could we, Venezuela, see the world in left and right again? And this is my theory. We were talking about religion. I have a theory that politics has become this generation's religion.
Wow.
Like, you follow steadfast whatever your party believes. So you're Republican or you're Venezuelan. You come here and you are against the left in your country, that means that you're the right. That means that you're here and you are right wing, because left is evil and right is good. Then on this side, the left, right? And this has happened to me too. You have left wingers here who are like, wait, Fidel Castro is left and Hugo Chavez is left. That means they're good. That means they're good, and that means like that's they're on our side. We cannot see politics like religion. You have to be critical. You have to think critically. And it doesn't matter if they're left or right. You can have dictators on both sides, honey. Look at Mussolini.
Yeah.
Like and that is what is really freaking me out right now, is politics cannot, where if someone that is against you is a heretic, someone that thinks differently than you is a heretic. You are right. You are morally correct. You are morally superior. We can't do that anymore. We can't see the world in black and white like this. How is this polarization going to finish?
It's frustrating because, I mean, at least a lot of the Cuban American people I know who were, still are hardcore Trump supporters, they would fully admit that they don't like researching, that they just it's an echo chamber. And I know that can obviously happen also on the left, where it's just like an echo chamber and everyone's just expressing the same sentiments and beliefs, and that's all you kind of stick to. And God damn it, Facebook is one of the worst places for all of this.
And Twitter.
Yeah. I mean, social media in general is just like really, really terrible for like the generation of my parents, with misinformation and the kind of stuff that I would catch family members sharing. Me dio tanta pena, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so wrong. This is so false.
Which is like, another thing that I wanted to mention is there's been a lot of QAnon conversations, but what people don't know, and this is again, ignoring the Latino vote and ignoring Latinos in general, QAnon has a huge Spanish community. They've translated all their stuff into Spanish. But since it's in Spanish, it's kind of unregulated. And no one is following, and people aren't at least in English, like a lot of these Twitter accounts are being closed down, etc. But I've seen it in Spanish, and there's articles on Vice about how QAnon in Spanish is enormous. And it's kind of like a Wild West because no one cares and no one is doing anything about it. So in my opinion, the like right-wing Latinos in the States reading all this stuff, like they're becoming more and more and more and more misinformed, and no one's doing anything about it.
There was articles all over the place leading up to the election that specifically Latinos in Florida were being targeted by QAnon and a lot of conspiracy theorist websites and videos. And I saw it within my own community and family members, people that I went to high school with that still live in Miami. There is something that we haven't talked about, though, is something else that is often overlooked in politics when it comes to Latinos in the U.S. is race. That's another one.
Because they think Latino is a race,
No.
They're like, oh, what race are you? Latino? It's like, that is not a race. It's not a race. It's not a race, bro. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, there's Asian Latinos, there's Black Latinos, there's white Latinos, there's mixed mestizo Latinos, there's everything. There's everything. There's Native American Latinos, there's everything.
Yeah, and especially even with the...
But how do you think race affects, like, what is it that you think is the most misunderstood?
I mean, I think a lot of it also comes down to privilege as well, right? There's a huge difference still in how white Cuban Americans are treated compared to their Afro-Cuban, brothers and sisters. White Cubans are always going to have more privilege than a Black Cuban simply because of the color of their skin. And that's just fact, right? So I think like Afro-Latinos have a completely different view of the world and politics simply because of their race, right? It's because they've lived a completely different experience. It's wild how there's all these different aspects that display how different we are, and yet we're still considered just one.
Because I'm also very frustrated by people claiming people are and aren't Latina or Latino when that's what they identify as, and why can't we celebrate Why can't we just celebrate without, I just don't get it. It's like, and we even talked about it with our Mexican, are you American, Jordy? Or are you just Mexican? Okay, we talked about it with our Mexican-American producer, Jordy, which is like, even within the Mexican-American community, it's completely different. You have the Tejanos that have been there their whole life. It's literally, they were there when it was Mexico and they've just stayed there and now they're Texan. Yep. And then you have the, second generation or first generation Mexican-Americans that came here and documented. Then you have the wealthy Mexicans that just landed and went to college and then got an OPT and then stayed. Within that community there's just so much diversity. You can't even speak to the Mexican American community as a monolith. You can't. And that's just one
Isn't
part.
That interesting? Because to them, we're all Mexican, right? But then even within the Mexican community, they're so different as well. And no one gives a damn, it seems. They just want to throw... It's like, to me, it's laziness. To me, it's laziness and that they don't really care enough. Well, you're going to have to start caring, my friends.
No, Jenny, what you're saying is so right. I think that they didn't need to care that much until now where, we are 20% of the population. More and more of us are becoming American citizens. It's going to become more of an issue.
Yep.
And unless we have more politicians like us or like, my other Latin friends from other backgrounds, from different points of view, they're going to need to start seeing what the fuck we actually are. Oh my God. You know what's very funny? My white boss just asked me, are piñatas specifically Mexican or do they use piñatas in other countries in South America?
We just talked about this in another episode.
That's an example. I mean, at least he's asking.
Again, good intentions.
Good for him. He should run for office.
He's asking the right people. He's doing his research. Kudos.
He's doing his thing. Well, Jenny, nos veremos pronto. Hablaremos pronto. Hasta ese entonces, que Dios te bendiga.
Igualmente.